Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar. Today we'll be talking about methods and background on implementing strategic portfolio management within the Microsoft Project Online and PPM platform. We do have some upcoming webinars in the next couple of weeks that may be of interest. The first one is on how to go about deploying a real cloud PPM reporting solution using Project Online and PROJILITY's Hammerhead solution. That is going to be held on April 28th. And then we do have another session specifically to the healthcare vertical about managing healthcare investments, treating them almost like a stock portfolio. So that event is going to be on Thursday, May 4th. We're going to be doing these webinars throughout the summer. Hopefully you can join us. Additionally, all of our webinars are recorded. So our series from last year is at the Vimeo channel on the link here, vimeo.com/channel/2015 webinars. Likewise, all the ones from this year, that's the ones from January on, are all posted on our 2016. So we'll send out links to these, and then you can go watch them at your convenience. You can even subscribe to the channel, so when new videos hit, it will alert you and let you know. My name is Rob Hirschman. I'll be your presenter today. I'm a partner at a company called PROJILITY. We specialize in helping large enterprises plan, deploy, support, and train their folks on project portfolio, resource capacity planning, as well as project team collaboration. Been in this business as a company since 2005. You can see some background information there. And PROJILITY as a company really does focus on a combination of professional services around helping clients plan, deploy, and support Microsoft PPM, establish solid, consistent PMO governance procedures and processes, and then supporting PPM environments, both process-wise and tool-wise. We additionally have a series of solutions called Hammerhead, which allow you to get more visibility, insight, and gain better controls and access to your data within your PPM environment. So if you have any information or you're curious about that, we can certainly share that. Today we're going to be going through agenda-wise. First, talk about a little bit about what strategic portfolio management is and what does it mean. How does it fit into an overall PPM strategy as an organization? So if you've gone down the road with implementing PPM, or maybe you're just thinking about doing it, how is this going to play into that strategy? What do you need to do? And also, we'll talk about, the third bullet down, what are some of the portfolio management components that are specifically in PPM that support portfolio management processes today. We'll actually walk you through some deployment best practices, so that's lessons learned in having deployed this solution for literally hundreds of companies to date and government agencies. Finally, we'll answer any questions. So if you have them, we will open the Q&A panel on the left towards the end. And we also like you to fill in the survey. If we can get a little feedback from you in terms of what you liked and didn't like, that'll help us actually craft our future content. Goals of today: provide an overview of the portfolio optimization selection capabilities within Project Online. These are also related to Project Server if you're using Project Server on-premise, and also provide you a little bit of business context and some recommendations on what we've seen across industry and in the past for people looking to implement this. So hopefully you find this useful. To begin with, when we start looking at the overall portfolio management process, it's really a part of a larger procedure that most organizations have in place. Portfolio optimization and selection really does focus on the front end part of the process. It's all about planning your portfolio, selecting the right investments before you go into monitoring and execution. And in a slide, we're going to explain what the business value of doing this up front is. It may seem fairly obvious that if you don't choose the right projects, you can't get a lot of the business value. But today we're really focused on that part of the life cycle, the optimization, selection, and portfolio planning. So when we look at the value from a business perspective of actually doing proper project selection, there's really two axes here. Along the left axis, you'll see it's about the value of portfolio management if we look at that from a 0 to 100% scale. And on the bottom, it's the value of project management. So if you can think about it, portfolio management is really going to tell you, am I selecting the right projects? So it's the ability to actually select the right pieces of work to do versus doing the right things, doing things the right way. So when we talk about improving portfolio management, we look at the realized value in an organization, and we're losing anywhere from 25 to 50% of the value, a combination of improper selection processes as well as the inability to execute. And the two are actually pretty well linked, that you can do one and not do the other. You're not going to see value in your portfolio. So today we're really going to be focused on that top one, improving your portfolio management. In other sessions we talk about how you can improve project management, but both are important to an overall portfolio management strategy and execution process. Without one and the other, you can't successfully do project portfolio management. So when you think about it, think about which side is most important, but understanding they both tie together very tightly. So how does this fit into your overall procedures for PPM? When we start thinking about the life cycle that you put in place, and this is a representative life cycle where you can go through your creation of your portfolio and your projects. You have a formal selection process where you're going to sit down on an annual, quarterly basis, or even a monthly basis and review all of the projects that are in your pipeline. You're then going to go about doing your planning, which is your detailed planning, and then management. So if you look at the different work streams here, we have demand management up front in the portfolio creation process where we're getting projects in. It's really intake management. Where are the new projects? Where are the new ideas coming in? And do I have a formal mechanism for doing that? That's a really important part of this. The selection part, which is really what we're focused on today, is about making the right kind of strategic decisions. But it's very hard to do that unless you have good demand and intake information, unless you start to capture financial management information, which you see about halfway down, start to capture a little bit of resource information, and then you have the ability to actually do analysis and reporting across this entire life cycle. We also need a history of data in terms of how well we selected in the past, what kind of value we received from the investments we made, and how well did we execute. That data is very, very important to making decisions because it's going to inform how you do things, what you do, and at what pace. So when we talk about PPM, we're really focused today on the portfolio demand management, really the selection process, which is really the bridge between your strategy and your execution. And having a process, most organizations have a process, they don't necessarily have automated tools. A lot of it's done on a whiteboard or a spreadsheet or in hallway conversations. What if we could formalize or automate that process in some of our project management tools? And that really is the vision Microsoft has. So Microsoft's overall PPM strategy really encompasses three different pillars, if you will. On the left, it's about work management, so that's the ability to plan, track, and manage the everyday work that's going on. Project management, which is about the actual management of all the information and sharing that upwards and downwards in a proper way. And then portfolio management, which is much more about the front-end strategy. So before we get to tactical execution and managing our people and our work, we need to know what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. So what PPM does, it unifies these three process areas, whether it's work, project, and portfolio management, and delivers that in different experiences in different devices. So Microsoft maps to this lifecycle very, very nicely and provides a lot of tools within its platform to support these processes. When we talk about the different phases, we want to define those. The first one is demand management and portfolio planning. So think of this as really the ability to collect all of the projects and all of the new ideas and all the requests that may be executed as a part of a portfolio. Some people only capture projects. Some people only capture ideas that then become projects. Some people get it from a work intake or management system and vet it before it gets into PPM. There's different ways to do this, but there's information we're going to be capturing at the demand management level that's going to be critical to making portfolio level decisions. The next component is portfolio optimization and selection, and this is really defined as choosing the best mix of projects that you're going to perform during a portfolio cycle. And you have to define not only what the criteria is, but what does that cycle look like, because that can influence your decision making as well. The third part of this is all about execution and monitoring. Once I've made those decisions, we want to actually track the performance and the stats on how the activities are going, doing ongoing reviews and assessments. Most organizations are pretty good at doing that. Where they really fall down is in the top two areas and making the right decisions and having a good intake mechanism. So let's start out and start getting into a little deeper level on demand management and portfolio planning and how this happens. There are some prerequisites before you can actually start implementing the technology, Project Online, to select and prioritize the different projects you have in your portfolio. The first one of those prerequisites is a formalized process. So you have to have a way to capture and a process for getting intake, getting requests for any new projects or work that you're going to have. So think of it really as your pipeline. And you're going to have some kind of a pipeline mechanism for capturing that, whether it can be forms or a spreadsheet, whatever it's going to be. PPM helps automate that. The second prerequisite to doing portfolio management is we need to have business drivers. And I'm going to get into a little more detail about this, but it's essentially the ability, what you're going to be scoring your projects against. They're going to have a description and an impact statement, but we have to define those. If we haven't defined our business drivers, we have nothing to plug into the system. And a lot of the work we do is, frankly, pulling in sample business drivers from sample organizations to help really quantify or rationalize those business drivers. We then have to have the ability to actually prioritize those business drivers. Can we sit in a room and all agree on what's most and least important? The tools can provide us some automation and some statistics around that, but if we actually don't do it today, that's going to be a new process, and we really want to determine how we're going to implement that. And finally, we have to have certain information about our projects, certain metadata, in order to do any of this stuff. We have to be able to capture cost estimates and budgets in the system. We have to be able to do resource demand management, because most organizations are resource constrained as well as cost constrained. How do we capture those? PPM has some methods for that. And finally, we have to have the ability to align the projects to the business drivers, to be able to, again, sit in a room with all the key decision makers, Try to be as rational as possible and objective in the decision-making process. So if we're thinking about preparing for portfolio management at PPM, these are the formal requirements or the prerequisites to getting there. Intake management on its own is a big part of a process we spend a lot of time working on. It's really the ability to capture new project and work requests, as well as cost, resource, and prioritization information. In PPM, we use a set of functionality called project detail pages, and we also use workflow to not only capture the information, but also route that for different levels of approval so we can perform our analysis. The real goal with intake is to ensure we have a very consistent, measured process for capturing, governing, and controlling all of our new requests. And if it's coming from different systems or different people, or maybe it's emails, that's not really going to do it. You have to come up with a single mechanism for capturing everything, and that really is about intake and demand management. That formal intake process takes the form of request forms in PPM and Project Online. That's where we're going to get intake or input in terms of the data about our different projects, as well as the ranking and scoring of those projects. And then we need the ability to actually route those for certain approvals. So maybe based on the size or type of the project, or based on the location, certain metadata that's captured, we need to be able to have approvers in that life cycle. So PPM provides the ability to both do your request management as well as your workflow and your routing for that, and flow that into your portfolio analysis process so you make sure projects don't leapfrog the process and go right into planning and management, which is part of the problem most organizations have today. They go right to managing. They don't think about, well, are we really doing the right projects? So having a formalized intake process and then implementing the technology behind it is an important part of actually implementing portfolio management. The next step is actually doing business drivers. And this is a quick overview and a definition of what business drivers are. The purpose of any business driver in the organization is to really be able to capture the objectives of the organization. That information can come from different places. It could come from your 10K or your 10Q or your annual report if you're a public company. Maybe it's a message to shareholders, or maybe your CEO comes out every year and says, these are our pillars for the year. We want to grow in new markets. We want to reduce our expenses. We want to really expand our capabilities internally. Those are the things that are going to be driving the business forward. And it may make logical sense, but what we want to do is we need a way to measure those. And this can be really the hard part behind this. Can we quantify those business drivers? Something like growing into new markets? Maybe we can. Maybe high growth in new markets would be 15% or more growth in Asia Pac. Medium growth would be 10% or more. Low growth would be less than 5 or 2%. So we need a way to quantify those, whether they're soft or hard benefits, in order to rank and score our projects. So that's a really important part of the business drivers, is determining that method for quantifying those. A key unique characteristic of any business driver is they should accurately reflect the objectives of the organization. We don't come up with business drivers for their own sake, just to plug them in. We come up with them because they're meaningful to the business. So if we're going to start mapping our potential projects to business drivers, we want to make darn sure that those business drivers really do have an impact on the organization, and those projects are going to give us real business value. Importantly, as mentioned before, they have to be able to be quantified and measured to be meaningful. If we can't measure them, then we really can't score our projects against them. So business drivers and having them and coming up with agreement on them can take some time, but if you get to the point where you've got these and you can review those on a regular basis, it becomes much, much more useful. So planning gets a lot easier. To walk you through some details on some business drivers here, the business drivers are going to capture the values and the goal of the organization, as I mentioned. Each of the impact statements within a business driver is going to be captured, and it could be used to describe details about a project. For instance, a project is going to increase customer sat by 2 or 3%. That means it has a lower moderate rating. So that's going to be actually a scoring behind a business driver. Or we can say maybe a project reduces our expense base, to give an example, by $500,000 or $1 million. That could have a strong impact. So these impact statements are what we're going to be entering in the system, and they're really coming from the definition behind the quantifiable metrics in your business drivers. We then have two different methods for prioritizing business drivers. So there's a step in the process where we're going to sit down with the key executive or executives and come up with their input in terms of what's most and least important. I have a set of business drivers. Now I need to know what's most important to the CIO. When I talk to the CIO, I'm going to ask that CIO through a series of tools and processes to rate one against another. So an example of that is, well, customer sat against reducing expenses. Is that more, less, or equally as important as the other one? By rating and scoring those, we can come up with a prioritization on our business drivers that we can then overlay on our portfolio of potential investments and projects. We can do this in a calculated way. So PPM actually has some algorithms built in that Microsoft's had for years that do the comparison for us. We simply walk through the tools, we answer some questions, and Project Online is going to do the calculation and give each one a relative prioritization or a weight. It's going to tell us what's most and least important to the organization. So the automated tools can help actually take that data and make it useful information. A lot of organizations aren't comfortable with that. They want more of a manual way to do it. So this is where we're going to actually give each driver a manual rating to say how important it is or not is or isn't. So we can go manual, we can go calculated, or we can do a combination of those over time and start with manual. Once people are comfortable and familiar with the process, we can move to more of a calculated approach. So we want to start thinking about not only what are the business drivers, how are we going to quantify them, how do we rate and score them against one another, but how do we want to calculate that within the system? Do we want to use the system, or do we want our process and a manual override to drive that? Some sample business drivers. An example of that, and just to give you some thinking here, you'll see there's a driver in the left-hand column. Then we have what no impact may be, low impact, moderate impact, strong, and extreme impact. An example here is increasing market share in existing markets. Maybe we sit down with executives. What does no impact mean? That means we're going to improve our market share in these penetrated markets by less than 1%. This is something we can measure. We can say low impact improves it between 1 and 3%. Moderate may be 3 to 7%. Strong impact may be 7 to 15%, and then extreme could be more than 15%. So when we sit down and we rank a project, we can say, okay, well, how well does this project help us grow in existing markets? We can look at that and say, well, I think it's the result of this project, and this is the key here, is going to give us moderate impact. So we score that project, moderate impact on that business driver, and we're going to score each project on all of our important business drivers. The key here is we're going to have business drivers that could be global, ones for the whole organization, or we can localize those to a department or do a combination of both. So, for instance, a lot of organizations have a marketing group that has business drivers that are different from R&D or finance. We can have different business drivers for each group and then have global ones that apply because the CEO says they apply to every project we have. So we can localize and globalize these. And if you look down the list, you can see some of these may be relevant. Customer sat, employee satisfaction is more of an internal rating, and then product quality. That's something we see in a lot of research and development and new product development organizations. So by coming up with your business drivers and going through a process of really determining how you're going to score those, you can start to quantify that, rate and rank and score them, then apply that to your portfolio and start to build out different models. I want to give you some ideas as to what these may look like. And then what we're going to do is we're going to sit down from a process perspective and use some of the tools to help us automate this and prioritize those business drivers. We use something called a pairwise matrix, and this is, think of it as a spreadsheet that allows you to compare one business driver to another using the PPM solution. That way we can calculate what we call relative importance to each business driver. So we may say increasing market share is much more important than reducing expenses, but equally as important as expanding into new markets. What we're going to do is the system is then going to come up with a relative prioritization score for each of our business drivers to tell us how important is it to the organization. And this is really going to help us be objective, or as objective as we can, in the portfolio analysis and selection process. We're looking at the data. So projects that give us, big bang and increasing market share, if we have a limited amount of money, a limited amount of people, they're probably going to stay in the portfolio. Where if I have projects that align with employee satisfaction, I don't have all the money of the people, they're probably going to come out. The prioritization allows us to actually rank and score each of our business drivers and then overlay that on our portfolio. So it's a really useful tool, the ability to do this in a PPM solution. After that point, we get into what we call portfolio analysis and selection. And this is really going to answer the question, which projects should we do, given some information? That information is going to be the priorities of the organization, the money we have, and the people we have. And those are different but related constraints. And you can see the tool is actually going to walk us through a 5-step model, which we're going to get into next. What this does, think of it really as a sandbox. And it can be a gate in your process where you can say, okay, projects don't get approved until they go through formal analysis and selection by the PMO. And once that happens, your project is off, it's been budgeted, you can do it. Or you can have other projects that bypass this process, understanding people may have discretionary budgets and then non-discretionary ones which have to follow this process or procedure. So it's really a way for you to model different scenarios, come up with what ifs, and compare solutions to say, hey, we thought of 3 or 4 solutions to this problem. Here are the different mix of investments we can do in a given scenario where we maybe don't have all the money or don't have access to the people. So portfolio analysis and selection takes us through this process and automates some of the analysis. And that's really what PPM tools are very good at, is the automation and the analysis, and they're using all the data and the algorithms in the back end to help you make the right business decisions. So just breaking out the components of a good solid portfolio analysis and selection process, the first part of it is the ability to define your properties of the portfolio. We may say we have a portfolio of all of our IT investments for fiscal year 17. We may put a deadline and say all the requests have to be in by June 1st. When we define that portfolio, we're going to define what it is and the rules of the portfolio we want to analyze are. For instance, what's the time frame? Are we looking at a 1-year timeline, a 3 or a 5-year timeline? Do we want to look at resources or money, one or the other or both? What do we want to analyze, and what's going to be our cost constraint? Are we looking at total cost, return on investment, total budget, first year cost, CapEx or OpEx? We define all that up front when we're building out our initial portfolio. Once we've built out the portfolio with all the rules, we've added the potential investments, we then want to go and prioritize our projects. What this does, it helps us, it really assists with the process of prioritization by looking at all of our projects on a matrix. And we're going to show you this in a couple of minutes. That's going to allow you to compare them and look at how each one aligned with our business drivers. Were some higher priority than others? Did some align better than others? That's what project prioritization is going to allow us to do. The results of the prioritization are going to come out, and this is where the executives in the room are going to be able to see the reality of the situation. When we review our priorities, it's going to stack rank our projects based off of all the feedback and allow us to actually review that and determine, is this the go forward set of projects? It's also going to tell us, objectively speaking and data driven, what our top priority and our bottom priority projects are, so we can very quickly take a look and say, well, there's projects here we probably shouldn't be doing. Why don't we move them out of the portfolio, and then we can figure out what we're going to do with the budget we have. So we want to review those priorities to make sure everybody in the room is on the same page before we go do an analysis. This is a very important part of the process. This is typically where the arguing happens. Hey, why is my project at the bottom? Well, let's look at the data. How well does it give us business value? And if you want to shift some money to that bucket, that's fine, but we're going to have to actually take some of the projects that we have that are higher value out. Which gets us to really our solution approach here, which is the ability to analyze our budget first and foremost. And now that we've got our prioritized projects, now we're going to say, maybe I don't have all the money. Maybe the portfolio is asking for $18 million. We only have a $14 million IT budget that's been handed to us this year by the CEO. So what can we do, or more importantly, what should we do to give the organization the best business value? We can analyze our costs and run a series of financial constraint models to do our what-ifing, to say, okay, well, given $15 million, here's the projects we should do. And we can agree on that, or we can run back and go through different scenarios where we put lower priority projects in, move other ones out for the same amount of money. And what's that going to give us return on investment wise? So that's the first part of the process. The next part is people. And we find that most organizations, while they're cost constrained, really are heavily resource constrained. They may not have the people to do the work that they have in their pipeline. So it doesn't matter that I have $15 million. I've got 5 projects here I just can't staff because we don't have the resources. So the ability to analyze your resource requirements, and part of your demand management process, remember, is what are the resource requirements for each project or potential project. We can do that formal analysis to say what should and shouldn't we do, what can and can't we do, and by the way, what's a good resourcing solution? Now, do we bring people in from the outside? Do we push work off? We can play with the triple constraint, the schedule, scope, and budget in different ways here. So the portfolio analysis and selection process, this is the standard procedure, and this is actually what's built into your PPM solution today. Then we go through our analysis and selection. This is where we can really do our what-ifing. You're going to see a matrix that's going to show us what projects we have, which ones in green are selected, what our relative prioritization of the portfolio is, when they're going to start and finish, and what should and shouldn't we do based off of the money or the people that we have in the organization. So again, it's more about what should we do versus how are we going to do it. And it gives us the ability to actually model this out and ask different questions. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hop into a quick demonstration, actually show you how the software could operate in this kind of an environment. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to log in to my Office 365 environment, and I have Project Online enabled in here. So let's say good morning. I'm going to click on Projects. It's going to take me into my online environment, and this is Project Web App. So all of the functionality we're talking about is all performed right in Project Web App, the web browser-based interface. So from an intake perspective, one of the things we can do is actually capture our project requests. And we can do that right from our home page here, where we can create a new project request. Click on that real quick. And what it's going to do, it's going to offer us up what we call project types. what are the different types of requests we can get into the organization. This is great if we want to separate out or bifurcate different requests that may get routed to different groups for approval, or maybe we have different sizing requirements. So maybe an infrastructure project request looks very different from an SDLC, from an Agile, from an audit, from a Sarbanes-Oxley. Think of it as really the library of all the different project requests we may get into the organization. What we can then do is click Next. So I'm putting a new software development project request in. I can put a description in. I can pick information such as when is the project slated to start, so I can start to forecast it out. I can pick the relative department. So what department would be doing this work? Operations, finance, audit, research and development, new product development. And then I can actually apply different metadata to this. For instance, would this project be part of a larger program? So maybe we have a big SAP modernization going on. Or who is the executive sponsor for the project? Or maybe right up front I need to know, are we green, yellow, or red on the budget? Or is this part of a broader portfolio or a set of initiatives we have going across the organization? So we can put the request into the organization, and then it's going to go through a queue and start a process of review. So this is really the first level of capturing that project request. We have some organizations that do this directly in the Project Online interface, like you see here. Other organizations do it in a SharePoint list that then gets integrated in once something has gone from an idea to a project. You have lots of different options as ways to do this, but PWA and Project Online are designed really to support this process or this procedure. So what it's doing, it's actually initiating the project request. It's actually going to potentially apply a workflow based off of a project type. It may take a project schedule template that will help you do your basis of estimate and put that in here, as well as it may actually create a SharePoint site for this specific type of project as well. So this whole process can all be automated, your intake and your request management process within your PPM toolset. In this case, we're using Project Online to do this initiation. And this will come up here in a second. There we go. So we can see this request has come in, and one of the nice things about Project Online is going to give each project request a landing page. And that landing page is going to tell us exactly where in the lifecycle or the workflow this project is. In this case, this request has come in, it's in the create phase. So I can see if I scroll down a little bit, project information, that's been completed. And this has maybe been routed to a manager for approval, so maybe a notification went out to an executive saying, hey, this is actually waiting for input, so we can get into further definition. So this is really the sniff test if you want. We can also see the project information is here, and we can start to capture metadata or content on our project site, or start to build things out, or start to build our team out of our resources. What I can do is I can submit this, submit it into the workflow, and maybe it's already been submitted. Workflow and process. Okay, now a manager would have gotten notification that it had actually come out, and then we get notifications right here in our notification bar in Office 365. So what I can do as a manager is I can actually log in and get a notification and move it to the next stage of the workflow. I'm going to go to additional workflow data. It's going to open a page for me. And I can see it's in the initiation gate. So what I can do if I would have gotten a notification, I'm just going to kind of bypass that. I can edit it, take a look, see if there are any attachments to it, and I can just approve it at this point. So I'm going to say that's great. Get me more information about this. I think it's a really good idea that we do this project. Okay. So I go back to my project detail page. I'm going to refresh this. And so what it's done now, it's moved it to the next stage in the life cycle. Now it's saying we have to get project details, which could be our business case, and that could be capturing a lot more information than we initially had. For instance, now I need a justification. I need to know what the business benefits are going to be. Maybe I'm going to generate new revenue. The total cost of my project, maybe it's $225. Is there a risk rating? Is it going to impact a specific application across the organization? Maybe if I'm in healthcare or finance, I've got applications, SAP or Office 365. Are there any specific priorities? Is it a low, medium, or a high project priority? And then I capture details. Is there a capital project number? What's the financial status? Do we have force in and force out? Is it compliance or pet project? Is it a program? So we can capture as much or as little information as we want, including, is it a part of a product? So we can do our product portfolio management. Is it new or existing? What's the vitality of the product? So we can actually do this, save and submit that, and it's going to move it to the next stage in our workflow. Importantly, we're also going to start building out our strategic impact assessment. So we may say, for any project in this part of the organization, you need to score it against our top 5 business drivers. How well does this project help us expand in new markets, or increase customer sat, or improve employee satisfaction? And you can see all of our impact statements are all included here in these forms. Again, it'll take me through the process of capturing this. This is really our intake. As well as you can start, and it's saying, oh, I missed one. So let me go down to that one real quick. I think I missed one of our drivers here. And then the nice thing we can do is actually start to build out our basis of estimate here too. So maybe we want to start as we're building out our BOM, what is our schedule going to look like? So it can actually take our schedule template for this type of project and apply it so we can start forecasting out our resources. Forecast how long it's going to take, but also start to forecast what we call generic resources. So this is where we can start saying, I'm going to need a certain number of analyst hours, or I'm going to need a project manager or a product engineer, and we can do that down here within our PPM system within a schedule. The other option we have is we can actually go and request resources, which is I'm going to hop over there right now. So one of the nice things is we actually have a new mechanism in PPM to request resources. We can actually go in, and there's a resource request button where we can click on that, and it's actually going to bring us to a resource request functionality. This is new, and this was released back in September in Project Online. And it allows us to add something called an engagement. So sometimes we might not have a schedule. Sometimes we want to put a request in and say, you know what, I need a product engineer, or I need Erwin on my project. PE for a 2-month gig in May. I can say when would it start and finish. So I can put a unique request in for a resource, either a role or an individual, and then that can be routed for approval. Either I need them 100% or 50%. Maybe I need about, based on my estimate, 220 hours. Please give me Erwin. So that becomes a request that goes into the system. And this is a part of Project Online as well as Project Server 2016 now. As a manager, I can then go in and get a view of maybe all the requests that are coming in. So what I can do is I can take a look at this, and then I can go over to a capacity planning view. This is the feeding mechanism, those generic resources for our portfolio management. And capacity planning is kind of nice. There's actually the ability to look at a heat map. So this is going to show me as a manager of all of the product engineers, what are all the requests coming in? Where do I have more requests than I have people based on their actual assignment and utilization? So I can actually go down here, look at product engineer, click on it, and it's going to say I have a capacity of 176 hours, but I've got more engagement than I have capacity. Well, why is that? I can click on that, and it's actually going to take me to a screen that's going to show me all the requests for product engineers that have not been assigned or committed yet. So this resource requisitioning or request process is new in Project Online, and it can really help you capture your resources. The nice thing about that is we now have the ability to set up notifications. So we can subscribe and say, okay, you can't assign Aaron or Erwin or any of my resources to a project unless I approve it. It will actually send you a notification. You can set a series of rules here that people can't do resource assignments without going through your resource manager. So this part of intake has been enhanced dramatically in the new version in Project Online. Once we've built that out, we've scored our projects, that's where we're going to be able to come down here to the strategy. And this is typically the area that's going to go through a lot of the different things we talked about before. We can set up our project dependencies, so we can say there are relationships between projects. Some can't start until others finish. Some have to be done when others are done. Some can't be done until others are finished. We can set up those rules, and then we can build out a portfolio analysis. So as I mentioned before in the description, the portfolio analysis is the area where we're going to go through that 5-step process. You see it at the top. We define the properties of a portfolio, prioritize our projects, review those, analyze them up against budget, and then resources. We're following the same process. We can define the portfolio, talk about what department or departments are we going to be analyzing. We can choose whose input from a driver prioritization perspective are we going to be using. Maybe we use just the COOs if we're looking at operations projects. We're then going to be able to go in and select the projects we want to evaluate as a part of this portfolio. And we can look at them by workflow stage. We could look at them by type. We could look at them by department. We can take different looks at it. These are a series of views where we can look at different ones. Maybe just the ones in selection. And that's all the ones in selection right now. We're then going to go and set up what we call our primary cost constraint, which is going to say within this portfolio, we're going to run this model against a single cost constraint. And we can show all the others, and that's fine. But if we really want to maximize return on investment, we want to do it against the total cost or the year one budget or the return on investment. We're going to set that cost constraint, and then that's what the system is going to use to model our portfolio. Finally, we're going to be able to check this box to enable the resource planning. Sometimes we just want to do it on budget. We'll worry about resources separately. That's fine. If we want to include this in our process, we can check this and start looking at the planning horizon, as well as what information about a resource do we want to sort or slice and dice this by. We can have it by role or department or skill. So we can do some pretty granular planning here from a resource perspective. Once we've set up our portfolio, we're then going to be able to prioritize our projects. And remember, we had that intake mechanism where all the projects were being scored against our business drivers. You'll see a matrix on your screen that shows you the business driver at the top, the project or potential project on the left, and how each project aligned with each business driver. We then have the ability to go in and review this. And this is typically done again in a group status where we say, okay, this audit project, I know you said it was moderate alignment, but it actually has strong alignment. Until we get the audit solution in place, we can't open the office in Asia Pac, which means we can't expand in new markets. So we can change around the model without changing the history. This is really a sandbox for you to come up with different solutions and try to really face the reality of what the business is doing. So what we can do is we can score our investments as a group. And based off that, if we go to the next step, this is where we're going to use some of the automated tools in PPM. What it's going to do, it's going to use its algorithms to help you prioritize your projects. It's going to look at all those stack rankings, it's going to look at the business priorities, it's going to overlay them together, and now it's going to tell you what your top and bottom priority project are. And this can be a little disappointing to a lot of folks in the room. If they look and their project is down here at the bottom or it has no alignment, you know if you don't have all the money, you're probably going to come out of the portfolio. Likewise, it's going to be a series of trade-offs. Do you really want to do a project that has low alignment? We've got these top 4 or 5 projects that really we want to spend our money on this year. So again, we're trying to take as objective a look as possible at the portfolio. Once we agree on this, and if we do not, we always want to go back to the last step. This is kind of the fun part of portfolio management. So this is where we can go in, and you'll see on the right we have a table that shows us all the projects are selected, because we're saying we're doing everything right now. We can get about a max return on investment or value of that portfolio of about 100% if we select the right projects and execute on them. Our total budget, again, our cost constraint here is $21.3 million. If we look at the left, we can see there's 29 projects in our portfolio at about 100% value. Now the reality is we may not have that $21 million. So the first thing we can do is go in and say we have an $18 million budget this year and click on the recalculate button. Once we do that, the system's going to run the model and it's going to try to maximize our ROI at the budget point we have by selecting and deselecting projects we're saying are most or least important. So it's saying for $18 million, good news, we can get about 96% value from the portfolio, but there's 4 projects here we're going to have to move out. You can see the move in and move out. One's a marketing project, one's infrastructure, one's software development, and new product. We may want more information about that, such as what product is it a part of? What's the vitality? Is it a new or an enhancement if we're looking at a product portfolio? Now that's really good information, but we can also take a look at it on a scatter chart. Scatter chart's going to show us on the bottom axis the cost, on the left axis the value. So ideally we want projects that are low to moderate cost, medium to high value. But you can see the projects it's recommending that come out, the white ones, are high cost, low value. Kind of makes sense when you think about it. So now we're going to be able to do our trade-off analysis. And this is going to say, you know what, that ERP upgrade, I think we have to do that. But I tell you what, we got projects here, like this, let's say the catalog project. Why don't we delay that till next year? So what I can do is I can do the trade-offs and recalculate that. And the system's going to, again, use its algorithms to try to maximize return on investment. So we went from 95 to 90, but we're doing the projects you said you wanted to do. One was moved out and one was forced out. The nice thing is we can save this model. And we can say, okay, well, for this one, this is going to be our 18 million forced out without catalog. And when we save that, we can then compare that and say, you know what? We came up with 3 different solutions here. I know you want to do every project. The reality is we only have $18 million. Let's compare the solutions we came up with. I've thought of a couple things. Maybe you have some good ideas. So in a baseline situation, we've got $21 million and 100%. In the $18 million, without the catalog, we're at 90%. But if I have a different situation, maybe I can get 95%. And you look at the bottom, it's actually going to show us which projects are in and out in each scenario and what the relative prioritization value is on the left. We want to try to stay as close to that efficient frontier as possible, which tells us for any given set of investments, any portfolio, there's a maximum return on investment. When we start pulling resources away from that, that's where we're going to come off of that value curve. So we want to stay as close to that as possible by doing the right projects. It's all about project selection. We may sit down and as a business say, okay, we've made a decision. We're going to go forward with this particular portfolio. Let's go forward with it. What we can do is we can commit that portfolio and move that to the next stage. Now, if we're doing resource analysis, we may say that's really great, but let's take a look at it from a resource perspective. I'm glad we figured out how to fund it, but if we start looking at the resources, let me go to our baseline here. If we look at our resources, we can only get 79% of value from that portfolio. Make the screen a little bigger here for you. Because we have projects here that we can't staff. And you'll see it's moved them out simply because there's resource requirements that can't be met. And if we look at this, we can start to see why if we look at the schedules. So this is the relative schedule for each project. And you can see all of our investments here are happening at about the same time with the same pool of resources. So the question becomes, well, what are those resources? Well, if I go to the requirements detail view here, what it's going to show me is my resources by project investment. So I know which ones I can do, but if I look down here at the projects I can't do, it's going to show me at an FTE level for each project where I'm short resources. So Jim, I know you really want to do that translator project. The problem is I'm short a tester in October and part-time trainer. And someone in the room may say, well, I have an idea. Maybe we can take a tester and trainer that I'm using on a different project and actually share time. That may be a good solution. Or I need a trainer here on health assessment. Maybe for a month we contract out training for these two projects because they're pretty similar. So it's going to enable that conversation around resources, and these resources are going to come in through either your project schedule, as we showed, your generic resources, or the resource request through those engagements. So the nice thing is we have a couple of options here. If we want to go beyond the discussion and say, well, I don't have any idea what to do here, what we can do is we can say, okay, well, what if we moved projects out? So let's say we took some of our top priority projects and I moved the October project out to January. And I'm going to take this other October project and I'm going to move that one up to January too. So if we delayed two projects, will that help me do other projects that I have with the same resources I have? I can't add resources. But what I can do is start to look and say, well, nah, that doesn't really solve my problem. Okay, well maybe we want to take a January project and we move it out to April. So I'm going to shift the project out a couple months, but maybe, I know you really want to do this health assessment project, what if we push that one out to July? So we can start to run the scenario of delaying work with the same pool of resources, given the fact that we can't add resources, to see in that situation, can we change things? Now, if that doesn't work, we can always say we have a hired resources ability. Let's say we brought 4 people in. Let's see what the results of that would be. So we're at 79%. Now, if I bring 4 people in from the outside, then I've got these 3 projects that are strategic, the currency translator, health assessment, and helmet, that I can now move in. I can now staff those projects. So good news, if you give me a little more money and some more resources, we can actually do those projects. Your next question is going to be, well, who do I need to bring in? Well, the system actually has a built-in hired resource report. So this can really help you with your resource modeling and constraint analysis. And this is going to tell me, well, I'm going to need a product engineer on that helmet project in April for 2,000 hours, and the average cost of a product engineer to us is about $95 an hour if we outsource it. So it's going to cost me another $200K if I want to do that project as it's scheduled. Do you want to do it or not? Other ones like testers and trainers, we would capture the amount of money it's going to cost us. Then we could go back and add that to our total budget and figure out what the impact's going to be from a cost perspective. So this module, if you want to use it, and a lot of our clients like this, lets us run models. It does assume you have generic resources or roles associated with these projects. So we'll see that some of them have them, some of them don't. And we can see if we look over here a little bit, has resources. So we can see some of these projects have resources, and as a matter of your process, you may require projects to be generically resourced. We have some here like the ERP project that don't. So I can't even take a look at that project because I don't have a resource plan from you, Jim. Put it in and we'll take a look at it. So this is really the part of the tool that allows you to actually analyze your resource requirements as it relates to the investments you're going to make. And if you like this model, you can commit it and it'll move it to the next stage in your workflow. So consider using this component of it. You may start with cost analysis and next year move into cost and resource analysis. You have to have some good processes in place to build out high-level resource schedules, resource plans, or use those resource engagements, but the tools are essentially in PPM to do that. And then we can get different levels of portfolio reporting. We can start look at when products are going to launch, or what's the progress of the portfolio, or get information out and get dashboards on the entire portfolio and roll portfolios up. So PPM, Project Online, allows you to do this in an automated way. Okay, I'm going to hop back to our presentation now. So in our demonstration, we wanted to walk you through some of the capabilities, how the product works, and how it can be configured. A really key part of this is establishing the processes behind it. If you don't have the processes, it's very hard to use the tools. But the good news is that the tools do provide guidance that can help inform your process. So it really is one of those things where they do come together very nicely. So when we talk about implementation, I wanted to share some best practices on organizations that do this successfully. The first thing from an implementation best practice of portfolio management is mapping the planning cycle you use so you can do real prioritization. You don't want to do this just to do it. You want to do it because you're going to do your fiscal planning in October for your January projects. You need to get intake or new project requests in by June. Let's deploy the system just for a subset of those projects and start using that to prove out what we can do from a decision-making process. If you can show real value from the solution and real value from that process, people will buy into it. What you want to do as well is you're rolling this out, think about covering a part of your portfolio. It's pretty ambitious to say we're going to capture every new project request and do all of our scoring in this tool out of the chute. So our clients that are successful actually start small. They say, let's just do the IT infrastructure portfolio, or let's take one executive or one director's portfolio and get it into the tool. Once you do that and you prove it out, you can start to sell the value of it and broaden the use over time. You'll also want to consider using some of this functionality to support some in-flight analysis. And this means you got 20 projects that are going this year. Why don't I go in and start to measure, are they really giving me the business value I'm looking for? Are there projects that I should really be killing? Are there projects that aren't really projects anymore? They just keep going on. So you don't have to use it just for your pipeline. We have a lot of clients that are actually using it to look across active projects today. And finally, if you're looking to implement portfolio management, treat it like a project. Have a procedure development phase. Understand you're going to be asking for a change in how people work and their activities. They're not going to be sitting in a room making decisions based off what's on a whiteboard. They're actually going to be asked for quantifiable data. And that data is going to go into a system to help drive decision making. So there is going to be a change required to how people work. But it can actually make their lives a lot easier if they follow the process in automation. There is a technical deployment component to this. It's not all drag and drop. There's different nuances to how the system works, limitations to how many projects, best practices. And finally, we always recommend you engage with people who know this, who know the process, know the tool, and can glue those things together with the been there, done that, who can really shepherd you through the process. And that's one of the things, a company like PROJILITY really does specialize in that stuff. So at this point, we wanted to open the floor to Q&A. We have a Q&A panel at the left. I'm just going to enable that here in a second. And you're going to be able to put in any questions you may have. As we go through that, remember we have some webinars coming up on deploying a real cloud PPM reporting solution. We're also going to be talking about managing healthcare investments like a stock portfolio. And we'll send you out a copy of this presentation. If you could please actually go to the site and you can actually fill in the survey, you will get a copy of it. Likewise, you can get access to all the session recordings from our webinars this year and last year on the Vimeo channels that are on the page here. And then we're going to hit Q&A here. If you do want to get in contact with us, I'm Rob Hirschman, a partner at PROJILITY. You can hit my Twitter handle there. We also have a pretty good blog, PROJILITY.com/blog, where you have all kinds of stuff about doing resource analysis, portfolio management, best practices, and hopefully you'll go and complete the survey today. We'll get you a copy, actually access to the recording from today's session.